Some nights, the silence is louder than any scream. Daniel Hayes knew that feeling, sitting alone in a diner on Christmas night, watching families through frosted windows while his daughter celebrated miles away with a man who wasn't him. Across the room, Officer Lena Brooks stared at her untouched coffee, blood still staining the cuffs of her uniform from a call that went wrong. 2 broken people, 1 empty diner, and a conversation that would change everything. This is their story, raw, painful, and deeply human. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner hummed with a tired persistence, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the red vinyl booths look like they'd been dipped in old nicotine. Outside, Boston wore its winter like a dirty coat. Snow piled in gray mounds along the curbs, ice crusting the sidewalks, Christmas lights blinking half-heartedly in shop windows that had already closed for the night. Daniel Hayes sat in the corner booth, the same one he'd been sitting in for the past 3 hours, nursing a coffee that had gone cold somewhere around hour 2. His reflection in the window looked back at him like a ghost. 42 years old but feeling closer to 60, dark circles under his eyes, stubble that had crossed the line from rugged to neglected about 2 days ago. His phone sat face up on the table, the screen dark. No calls. No messages. He knew there wouldn't be any. The diner was almost empty. Just him, an older waitress named Rita who'd stopped asking if he wanted a refill, and a guy at the counter who might have been homeless or might have been a grad student. In Boston, at 2 in the morning, it was hard to tell the difference. Daniel picked up his phone, unlocked it, scrolled through his photos. There she was. Emma. 7 years old in this one, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing the Red Sox jersey he'd bought her for her birthday. That was 4 years ago. Before everything fell apart. Before Sarah remarried. Before some other man started tucking his daughter into bed at night, started coaching her soccer team, started being called dad in all the ways that mattered. He locked the phone and set it down harder than he meant to. Rita glanced over from behind the counter, her expression somewhere between concern and the kind of weariness that came from watching people fall apart in her booths for 30 years. "You okay, honey?" she called over. "Fine," Daniel said. His voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "I'm fine." She nodded, didn't push. That was the thing about Rita. She'd seen enough late-night heartbreak to know when someone needed space and when they needed saving. Daniel wasn't sure which category he fell into anymore. The door opened, bringing in a blast of Arctic air and a figure in a dark blue uniform. Daniel glanced up, then looked back at his phone. Cop, young, probably just getting off shift. Boston PD worked insane hours this time of year. Drunk drivers, domestic violence calls that always got worse around the holidays, people freezing to death in doorways while the rest of the city pretended not to notice. The officer, a woman, he realized, walked past his booth without looking at him and slid into the one directly across the narrow aisle. She moved like someone who'd been on her feet for too long, every motion careful and deliberate, like her body was one wrong step away from just giving up entirely. Daniel tried not to stare, but something about her made it hard to look away. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that had come partially undone, wisps hanging around her face. Her uniform was crisp except for the cuffs of her sleeves, which looked darker than they should have. Wet, or stained. She didn't order anything, just sat there with her hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. Rita appeared with a coffee pot. "Rough night?" The officer looked up, and Daniel caught a glimpse of her face, pale, exhausted. Something raw in her eyes that he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror often enough. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Something like that." Rita poured her a coffee without asking, then disappeared back behind the counter. The officer wrapped both hands around the cup but didn't drink, just held it, like she was trying to absorb the heat through the ceramic. Daniel should have looked away. Should have gone back to scrolling through old photos of Emma, torturing himself with memories of a life he'd destroyed through his own selfishness and cowardice. But he kept watching the cop across the aisle, kept noticing the way her jaw was clenched tight, the way her shoulders were drawn up like she was bracing for a hit. She looked how he felt. The thought came unbidden, and it hit him harder than it should have. He didn't know this woman. Didn't know her name, her story, why she was sitting alone in a shitty diner at 2 in the morning on Christmas night. But he recognized something in her. That specific kind of loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with being invisible, with carrying weight that no one else could see. Before he could talk himself out of it, Daniel stood up. His legs protested. He'd been sitting too long, but he grabbed his cold coffee and crossed the 2 feet of linoleum that separated their booths. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She looked up at him, and for a second he saw a flash of something defensive cross her face. Cops probably got approached by strangers all the time. People wanting help, wanting to complain, wanting something. But then her expression shifted, softened slightly, and she gestured to the seat across from her. "Free country," she said. Daniel slid into the booth. Up close, he could see more details. The dark smudges under her eyes. The way her fingers trembled slightly where they gripped the coffee cup. The name tag pinned to her uniform, Brooks. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Lena." They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, exactly, but loaded with the kind of careful tension that came from two people who were both too raw for small talk, but too polite to just sit there saying nothing. "Rough shift?" Daniel finally asked, then immediately regretted it. Of course it was a rough shift. You didn't look like that after directing traffic. But Lena didn't seem bothered by the question. She let out a long breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" "Not really." She paused, took a sip of her coffee, grimaced at the taste. "You always approach random cops in diners at 2 in the morning?" "Only on Christmas." That got a real laugh out of her, small and surprised. "Fair enough." She studied him for a second, and he had the distinct feeling of being assessed, not as a threat, but as a human being. Whatever she saw must have passed some internal test, because she relaxed slightly. "What about you? What brings you to Murphy's finest establishment on the most wonderful night of the year?" The sarcasm in her voice was so thick you could have spread it on toast, and Daniel found himself almost smiling. "Avoiding going home to an empty apartment. Join the club." "That bad, huh?" Lena set her cup down. "I pulled a double. Supposed to get off at midnight, but we got a call right at the end of shift. Domestic. Guy was high on something, had his girlfriend pinned against the wall when we arrived." She said it flatly, no emotion, like she was reading off a grocery list. "By the time we got him cuffed and in the car, it was past 1. Then I had to do paperwork. Then," she trailed off, shook her head. "Sorry, you don't need to hear this." I asked. "Yeah, but that's what people say. They ask how you're doing, and they expect you to say fine and move on. Nobody actually wants the real answer." Daniel thought about that. About all the times Sarah had asked him how work was going, back when they were still trying to pretend the marriage wasn't dead. About how he'd always said fine because the truth, that he was drowning, that he was miserable, that he didn't know who he was anymore, felt too heavy to put on someone else. "Try me," he said. Lena looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if he meant it. Finally, she sighed. The girlfriend, the victim, she didn't want to press charges. Started crying, saying it was her fault, that he didn't mean it. And I had to stand there and watch her make excuses for the guy who just tried to choke her out. And I couldn't say anything because that's not how it works. We arrested him anyway, but he'll be out tomorrow, and she'll probably take him back. And in a month or two, we'll get another call to the same address. Maybe next time she won't be so lucky." She said it all in one breath, and when she finished, she looked almost surprised at herself, like she hadn't meant to say any of it out loud. "That's..." Daniel searched for the right word. "Heavy." "Yeah." They fell into silence again. Across the diner, Rita was wiping down the counter with the methodical movements of someone who'd done the same action 10,000 times. The overhead lights buzzed. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights momentarily flooding the diner with harsh white light before disappearing into the dark. "So," Lena said eventually, her voice softer now. "Your turn." "What's a guy doing in a diner on Christmas night looking like someone stole his puppy?" Daniel almost deflected, almost said something dismissive, and changed the subject. But there was something about the way she'd just opened up to him, a complete stranger, that made him want to return the honesty. "My daughter's spending Christmas with her mom and stepdad," he said. "I was supposed to have her this year, but I gave up my day. Told Sarah it was fine, that Emma should be with her new family. Made it sound like I was being noble or whatever." But you weren't. No, I was being a coward. The words tasted bitter. I was afraid. Afraid that Emma would have more fun with them. Afraid that she'd compare me to this new guy and I'd come up short. So I just didn't fight for it. Told myself I was doing what was best for her, but really I was just running away. Again. Lena's expression had shifted while he talked, the professional mask slipping to reveal something more human underneath. How old is she? 11, almost 12. That's a good age. Yeah. When I actually get to see her, which is maybe twice a month if I'm lucky. Daniel rubbed his face. I screwed up, you know. When Sarah and I split, I could have fought for more custody. Could have been there more. But I was so wrapped up in my own self-pity, so focused on how much I'd lost, that I didn't realize I was losing even more by not showing up. You still have time, Lena said quietly. Do I? She barely talks to me anymore. When I call, it's like pulling teeth. Every conversation is just empty. How's school? Fine. How's soccer? Good. That's it. That's all I get. Lena was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in slow circles. My dad died when I was 14, she said finally. Heart attack. Completely out of nowhere. He was fine one day, gone the next. And the thing that killed me, the thing that still kills me, is that I'd been mad at him that week. Can't even remember why. Some stupid teenage bullshit, probably. But I gave him the silent treatment for 3 days straight, and then he died. And I never got to say I was sorry. Never got to tell him that I loved him, that I didn't mean it. Her voice had gone thick, and she cleared her throat. My point is, your daughter still has you. You're still here. You still have the chance to fix it. And yeah, it's hard, and yeah, you've messed up, but at least you get to try. Some people don't even get that. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. I'm sorry. About your dad. Thanks. She gave him a sad smile. He was a cop too. That's why I joined. Thought I could honor his memory, or whatever. Be the kind of officer he was. Compassionate, tough, but fair. Someone who actually gave a damn. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out the job isn't what I thought it would be. Turns out you can give a damn and still watch everything fall apart. That why you're here instead of home? My apartment's just more silence. At least here there are other people, you know. Even if we're all ignoring each other. She paused. What about you? Really? Why'd you come here? Daniel considered lying. Considered giving some easy answer about not wanting to cook for one, or needing to get out of the house. But Lena had been honest with him, brutally so, and he owed her the same. I come here every year, he admitted, on Christmas. Just sit here and watch families through the window, watch them being happy and together, and I torture myself with it. Tell myself I deserve to feel this shitty, because I let it all slip away. That's pretty bleak. Yeah. Self-punishment doesn't fix anything, you know. I know, but it's easier than actually trying to change. Lena looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw recognition, understanding. Yeah, she said softly. It is. They sat there for a while, two strangers who'd stumbled into an unexpected intimacy. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rotation. People sleeping, people working, people celebrating or grieving or just existing in the space between. Inside the diner, under the harsh lights and surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and old grease, Daniel and Lena had carved out something fragile and honest. Rita appeared with the coffee pot. You two want refills? Sure, Daniel said. Why not? Lena added. Rita poured, gave them both a knowing look, and disappeared again. Daniel found himself studying Lena's face, the sharp lines of her jaw, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was thinking, the small scar above her left eye that he hadn't noticed before. How long have you been a cop? He asked. 6 years feels like 20. That bad? It's not all bad. Some days are good. Days when you actually help someone, when you make a difference. But those days are getting rarer. She wrapped her hands around the fresh coffee. Tonight, before the domestic call, we found a guy who OD'd in a park. College kid, maybe 22. He was already gone by the time we got there. And I had to stand there and watch the EMTs work on him even though we all knew it was pointless. And then I had to watch them call it. And then I had to help bag the body and wait for the coroner. And the whole time, All I could think was that somewhere, some parent is going to wake up tomorrow and get the worst phone call of their life, and there's nothing I could do about it. Her voice had gone flat again, that professional detachment sliding back into place. But Daniel could see the cracks in it now, could see the way her hand shook slightly as she lifted the coffee cup. "I'm sorry," he said, because what else was there to say? "It's the job." She set the cup down without drinking. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for it. My dad made it look easy, like he could carry all that weight and still come home and be present, still be a good father, a good husband. But I don't know how to turn it off. I go home, and I'm still seeing that kid's face, still hearing the girlfriend make excuses for the guy who tried to kill her. It follows me. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Lena looked up, surprised. "What?" "Caring, letting it affect you. Maybe that's what makes you good at the job. Your dad probably felt the same way. He just didn't let you see it. That's what parents do. They hide the ugly parts so their kids don't have to carry the weight." Something flickered across Lena's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He did hide it. I didn't realize how much until after he died. Found his journals in the attic when we were cleaning out the house. Pages and pages of cases that haunted him, people he couldn't save, times he'd messed up. He never talked about any of it, just kept it all locked up inside. And then he died. Yeah. She swallowed hard. Sometimes I wonder if the stress of keeping it all in is what killed him. Like his heart just couldn't take the weight anymore. Daniel thought about that. About all the things he'd kept bottled up during his marriage. The resentment, the fear, the crushing sense of inadequacy. About how he'd smiled and pretended everything was fine, even as the foundation crumbled beneath him. About how Sarah had accused him of being emotionally unavailable, and he'd gotten defensive instead of admitting she was right. "I did the same thing," he said, "with my marriage. Kept everything inside, told myself I was being strong or whatever. By the time I finally started talking, it was too late. Sarah had already checked out. Can't blame her, really. She was married to a ghost." "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Daniel took a long drink of coffee, buying himself time. He'd told this story before, to therapists, to his lawyer, to the few friends who'd stuck around after the divorce. But something about telling it to Lena, a stranger who had no context and no expectations, felt different, harder, more real. "I worked in finance," he started. "Investment banking, 80-hour weeks, constant stress, the whole Wall Street nightmare. Made good money, though. Sarah and I bought a house in Newton, had Emma, checked all the boxes. From the outside, we looked perfect. Happy family, successful career, all of it. But from the inside? From the inside, I was drowning. Hated the job, but couldn't admit it because I'd spent years building this identity around being successful. And the more I hated it, the more hours I worked, because at least at the office, I knew who I was supposed to be. At home, I was just this failure who couldn't figure out how to be a husband or a father." He paused, remembered Emma as a toddler, reaching up for him when he came home at 9 or 10 at night, already in her pajamas. Remembered how he'd been too tired to play with her, too stressed to read bedtime stories, too absent to notice Sarah's loneliness turning into resentment. "I missed everything," he continued, his voice rough. "First steps, first words, school plays, birthday parties. I was physically there for maybe half of it, but mentally I was always somewhere else. Always thinking about work, about deals, about proving that I was worth something. And Sarah tried. She tried so hard to reach me, to pull me back, but I couldn't do it. Didn't know how. So she left. Found a guy at her yoga studio. David, nice enough dude, does something with nonprofit work. He's probably home right now helping Emma open presents, being present in all the ways I never was. And the worst part is, I can't even hate him. He's good for her, good for both of them. He's everything I wasn't." Lena was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're talking about yourself in past tense, like that version of you is dead. Isn't it? I quit the bank, moved to a shitty apartment in Brighton, started doing freelance consulting, which pays a fraction of what I used to make, but at least doesn't make me want to drive into oncoming traffic. I'm not that guy anymore." "But are you a better guy?" The question hit like a slap. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find an answer that wasn't bullshit. "I don't know," he admitted finally. I'm different. I'm more awake, I guess. More aware of what I lost and why I lost it. But better? I'm still sitting alone in a diner on Christmas, so you tell me. At least you're awake. That's more than a lot of people can say. Lena leaned back against the booth. You know what my captain told me last week? He said I need to develop thicker skin. Said I'm too sensitive, too emotional, that I take things too personally. And maybe he's right. Maybe I need to be more like the other cops who can just clock out and forget about it all. But I don't know how to do that without losing the part of me that actually gives a damn. Don't, Daniel said, surprising himself with the intensity in his voice. Don't lose that. The world has enough people who don't give a damn. Lena smiled, small and sad. Says the guy who spent years emotionally checked out from his own family. Yeah, and look how that turned out. He held her gaze. I'm serious, though. What you do matters. The fact that you care, that you let it affect you, that's not weakness. That's humanity. Don't let the job take that away from you. Even if it breaks me? Especially if it breaks you. Better to break being honest than to survive being numb. They looked at each other across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Recognition, maybe. Or solidarity. The sense that they were both standing in the same burning building, watching it collapse. And at least they weren't watching alone. Rita appeared again, this time with a plate of fries. On the house, she said, setting them down. You both look like you need something. Thanks, Rita, Daniel said. She waved him off and disappeared back behind the counter. Daniel picked up a fry, realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. The salt tasted good. Real. So, Lena said, taking a fry herself. Tell me about Emma. What's she like? And just like that, the weight on Daniel's chest eased slightly. He found himself talking, really talking, about his daughter. Not the sanitized version he gave to acquaintances, but the real Emma. Smart and stubborn, with his dark hair and Sarah's quick wit. Obsessed with marine biology and soccer. Terrible at math, but too proud to admit she needed help. The way she'd laughed when she was little, this full-body thing that made everyone around her smile. The way that laugh had faded over the years as Daniel had disappeared further and further into his own misery. Lena listened, really listened, asking questions and laughing in the right places and not offering any bullshit advice about how to fix things. And then Daniel asked about her life. And she told him about growing up in South Boston, about her mom who still lived in the same house Lena had grown up in, about her older brother who'd moved to California and rarely called, about how she'd thought joining the police would make her feel closer to her dad, but instead just made her miss him more. Time passed in that strange way it does during deep conversations, the minutes both flying by and stretching out infinitely. At some point, Rita flipped the sign on the door to closed, but didn't kick them out. The guy at the counter eventually shuffled out into the cold. The snow started falling again, fat flakes drifting past the windows. It was nearly 4 in the morning when Lena finally looked at her phone and swore softly. I should go, she said, but she didn't move. Yeah, Daniel agreed, also not moving. They sat there for another minute, neither wanting to be the first to break whatever had formed between them. Finally, Lena slid out of the booth, and Daniel did the same. They stood in the aisle, suddenly awkward after hours of easy conversation. This was, Lena started, then stopped. Thanks. For talking. For listening. I didn't realize how much I needed it. Me too. She pulled out her phone, hesitated. Would it be weird if I got your number? Just in case I need to talk to someone who gets it. Daniel's heart did something complicated in his chest. Hope and fear tangled up together. Not weird at all. They exchanged numbers and then Lena gave him a small wave and headed for the door. Daniel watched her go, watched her push out into the cold, watched her figure disappear into the snowy dark. He stood there for a long moment, staring at her contact in his phone. Lena Brooks. Just a name and a number, but it felt like something more, like a lifeline thrown across the void. Rita appeared at his elbow, making him jump. That's a good girl, she said, nodding toward the door. You two seem to hit it off. We're just... Daniel trailed off, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Just what? Just two lonely people who'd stumbled into an honest conversation? Just two strangers who'd seen something in each other that felt real. Just nothing, Rita said, reading his mind. You connected with someone. Don't overthink it. Don't let it slip away. Daniel thought about Sarah, about all the moments he'd let slip through his fingers because he'd been too scared or too proud or too numb to hold on. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, you're right. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. What was he doing? Lena was a cop, probably 10 years younger than him, with her own trauma and struggles. What could he possibly offer her except more complications? He was a divorced father who barely had a relationship with his own daughter, who spent Christmas nights in diners because he couldn't face his empty apartment. He was exactly the kind of damaged goods that smart women avoided. By the time he paid his bill and walked out into the pre-dawn cold, doubt had hardened into something uglier. Fear. The same fear that had paralyzed him through his entire marriage, that had let him watch his life fall apart without fighting back. He pulled out his phone, looked at Lena's number. His thumb hovered over the delete button, but he didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, he shoved the phone back in his pocket and started walking toward the tea station, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air, his mind churning with everything Lena had said, everything he'd admitted, everything that might have just changed. Behind him, Murphy's Diner stood alone in its pool of yellow light, a small island of warmth in the cold Boston night. And inside, Rita wiped down the booth where two broken people had found each other, smiling to herself and hoping they were both smart enough not to let fear win. The next 3 days passed in a fog of half-formed thoughts and aborted text messages. Daniel would pull out his phone, type something to Lena, "Hey, how are you?" Or "Thanks for the other night," or just "Hi," then delete it all and shove the phone back in his pocket like it had burned him. What was he supposed to say? That he'd been thinking about her constantly? That their conversation had cracked something open inside him that he wasn't sure how to deal with? That for the first time in years, he'd felt actually seen by another human being, and now the silence felt louder than ever? All of it sounded desperate. All of it sounded like exactly the kind of emotional neediness that had driven Sarah away in the first place. So he said nothing. He went to work, such as it was. Sat in his apartment staring at spreadsheets for clients whose names he could barely remember, turning financial data into reports that nobody would read closely. The consulting gig paid the bills, but it was ghost work. The kind of thing you could do on autopilot while your brain spun in circles somewhere else entirely. His apartment in Brighton was a study in intentional minimalism that had crossed over into just depressing. One bedroom, barely furnished, a couch he'd bought off Craigslist, a TV he never watched. Walls that were still the same beige they'd been when he moved in 18 months ago. He told himself he was keeping things simple, not getting too comfortable, but the truth was simpler and uglier. He didn't think he deserved anything better. On the second day after Christmas, Sarah called. "Hey," she said when he answered, her voice carrying that carefully neutral tone she used when she was trying to be civil. "Just wanted to check in, see how your Christmas was." Daniel almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "It was fine, quiet. You didn't go anywhere? See anyone?" "Nope, just had a quiet night." The lie tasted metallic. He watched snow fall past his window, each flake disappearing into the gray slush below. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and he could almost hear her deciding whether to push. "Emma asked about you." His chest tightened. "Yeah?" "She wanted to know why you weren't there. I told her you had other plans." "You could have told her the truth, that I gave up my day like a coward." "Daniel," Sarah sighed, and in that sigh was the weight of 1,000 old arguments, 1,000 moments of disappointment. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to tell you that your daughter misses you. She has a funny way of showing it. She's 12, almost 12. She's figuring out how to be a person, and that's hard enough without her dad disappearing on her." "I'm not disappearing. I call her twice a week, and she gives you one-word answers because she doesn't know how to bridge the gap anymore. You're the adult, Daniel. You have to be the one to fix this." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell Sarah that it wasn't that simple, that every time he tried to talk to Emma, he felt like he was speaking a foreign language, that the distance between them felt insurmountable. But Sarah was right. She was always right about this stuff, and that made it worse somehow. "I don't know how," he admitted quietly. Sarah's voice softened. "Start by showing up. Actually showing up, not just calling. Take her to lunch. Go to one of her soccer games. Stop treating her like she's a duty you have to check off and start treating her like she's your daughter. What if she doesn't want me there? Then at least you tried. At least she'll know you cared enough to show up even when it was hard. They talked for a few more minutes, but Daniel barely heard it. His mind was stuck on what Sarah had said. Start by showing up. And how similar it was to what he'd told Lena at the diner. Being present matters more than being perfect. He'd said that like he believed it, like he had any authority to give advice about being present when he'd spent the last 6 years proving he was anything but. After Sarah hung up, he sat there staring at his phone. 2 contacts pulled up side by side. Emma and Lena. 2 relationships he was terrified of screwing up. 2 people he didn't know how to reach. He called Emma. It rang 4 times, and he was about to hang up when she answered. Hello? Her voice had that guarded quality it always had when she talked to him now, like she was waiting for him to disappoint her. Hey, sweetheart, it's Dad. I know, your name came up. Right, of course. How was Christmas? Did you get everything you wanted? It was fine, yeah. The silence stretched. Daniel scrambled for something to say, something that wasn't the usual scripted questions that led nowhere. I was thinking, maybe we could get lunch next weekend? There's this new place in Newton, does really good burgers. I have soccer practice Saturday, and homework Sunday. What about after practice? We could grab something quick. Emma hesitated, and in that hesitation Daniel heard all her doubts, all her learned expectations of him letting her down. I guess, if you're sure you can make it. The words stung because they were earned. How many times had he promised to show up and then canceled at the last minute because of work? How many games had he missed? How many school events had he blown off? I'll be there, he said, putting as much certainty into his voice as he could manage. I promise. Okay. She didn't sound convinced. I gotta go. David's helping me with my science project. Of course he was. Okay. I love you, Em. Love you too. She said it automatically, the way you'd respond to a cashier saying, have a nice day, and then she hung up. Daniel sat there holding his phone, feeling like he'd just failed some test he didn't know he was taking. But at least he'd tried. At least he'd made a plan to show up. That had to count for something. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when his phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Hey, it's Lena. Hope it's okay I'm texting. Been thinking about our conversation. How are you doing? Daniel stared at the message for a solid minute, his heart doing something complicated. She'd texted him. She'd been thinking about him, the same way he'd been thinking about her, apparently. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, Hey, I'm good. Been thinking about it too. How was the rest of your week? The response came almost immediately. Rough. Had another bad call last night. Guy jumped off a bridge. Been replaying it in my head nonstop. Jesus. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. Then after a pause, You around today? Could use someone to talk to who won't tell me to toughen up. Daniel looked around his empty apartment, looked at the spreadsheet on his laptop that he'd been staring at for 2 hours without actually working on, looked at his reflection in the dark TV screen, hollow-eyed and alone. Yeah, he typed. I'm around. Want to meet somewhere? Murphy's, 3 p.m. I'll be there. He spent the next 2 hours in a state of restless energy he didn't know what to do with. Showered. Changed his shirt 3 times before settling on the first one. Told himself this wasn't a date. That this was just 2 people who'd connected over shared loneliness. That he needed to keep his expectations in check. But his hands were shaking when he pushed through the door of Murphy's at 2:55. Lena was already there, sitting in the same booth she'd occupied on Christmas night. She was in civilian clothes this time, jeans and a dark blue sweater, her hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back. She looked younger without the uniform, more vulnerable. She looked up when he approached, and the smile that crossed her face was small but genuine. You came. Said I would. He slid into the booth across from her. You okay? Not really, but I'm glad you're here. Rita appeared with coffee, gave them both a knowing look that made Daniel want to crawl under the table, and disappeared again. Lena wrapped her hands around her cup in that same gesture Daniel remembered from before. Tell me about it, he said. The call. So she did. Quietly, haltingly, with long pauses where she stared into her coffee, and Daniel could see her reliving it. They'd gotten the call around midnight, someone on the Longfellow Bridge threatening to jump. By the time they arrived, a crowd had gathered, phones out, filming. The guy was young, maybe 30, standing on the wrong side of the railing in nothing but a t-shirt and jeans despite the freezing temperature. "I tried to talk to him," Lena said, her voice gone rough. "Tried to do what they taught us in training, establish rapport, keep him talking, convince him there were other options. And he looked at me and he said, 'You don't know what it's like. You don't know what I've lost.' And I wanted to tell him that I did know, that I'd spent the last 6 years watching people lose everything, that I understood how heavy the world could feel. But I couldn't. Because that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be professional, detached." So I gave him the script, and he jumped anyway. Her hands were shaking now. Coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup. "They pulled him out of the water," she continued. "He was still alive, barely. Broken bones, internal bleeding. They rushed him to Mass General. I don't know if he made it. I've been too afraid to call and find out." Daniel reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She flinched slightly, then relaxed into the contact. "That's not your fault," he said. "Isn't it? If I'd said the right thing, if I'd been better at my job, you can't save everyone. You can't fix everything. That's not how any of this works. Then what's the point?" She looked up at him, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "What's the point of caring if it doesn't make a difference?" Daniel thought about that, about all the times he'd asked himself the same question in different contexts. What was the point of trying to be a better father if Emma barely wanted to talk to him? What was the point of quitting his soul-crushing job if he'd already lost everything that mattered? What was the point of any of it when the world kept breaking people down faster than anyone could build them back up? "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think maybe the point is just showing up anyway. Being present even when it's hard, even when it doesn't fix anything. Because the alternative is checking out completely, and that's worse." "Is it? At least if you check out, you don't have to feel it." "No, you just go numb, and then you wake up one day and realize you've been sleepwalking through your own life for years, and everyone you loved has moved on without you." He said it with more force than he'd intended, and Lena studied his face like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. "Is that what happened with your marriage?" she asked quietly. "You checked out?" "Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I told myself I was protecting myself, protecting them, but really I was just a coward. And by the time I realized it, Sarah had already found someone who actually showed up." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the afternoon light was already fading. Winter in Boston meant dark by 4:30. Daniel watched the city move past the window, all those people going about their lives, none of them knowing or caring about the small dramas playing out in this rundown diner. "My captain put me on leave," Lena said suddenly. "Mandatory. Said I needed time to process. But I don't want time. I want to work. I want to be useful. Sitting at home just means more time to think about everything I couldn't do." "When do you go back?" 2 weeks. Minimum. Could be longer if the department shrink decides I'm not ready." "You think you're ready?" She laughed, bitter and sharp. "I don't think I've been ready for any of this since day one. But nobody asks you if you're ready before your dad dies. Nobody asks if you're ready before you watch someone jump off a bridge. You just have to deal with it." "You're allowed to not be okay." "Am I? Because everyone keeps telling me the opposite. My captain, my fellow officers, my mom, they all keep saying I need to toughen up, push through, stop being so sensitive. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Or maybe they're all full of shit." That got a real laugh out of her, startled and genuine. "Tell me what you really think." "I'm serious. You're not weak for caring. You're not broken because this stuff affects you. You're just," he searched for the right word, "human. And yeah, that makes the job harder, but it also makes you better at it. The world doesn't need more cops who can watch people suffer without feeling anything. It needs more people like you who actually give a damn." Lena's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. "You really believe that?" "Yeah, I do." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, laughed shakily. "Sorry, I'm a mess." Join the club. They ordered food neither of them was particularly hungry for, grilled cheese for her, a burger for him, and spent the next hour just talking. Not about anything heavy, just regular conversation, movies they'd seen, places they'd traveled, the weird neighbor in Lena's building who collected garden gnomes. Daniel's disastrous attempt to learn guitar last year that had ended with him donating the instrument to Goodwill after 3 frustrated weeks. It felt normal in a way nothing had felt normal in years. Easy, like they'd known each other longer than 3 days. But underneath the easy conversation, Daniel could feel something else building. A tension that had nothing to do with trauma or loneliness, and everything to do with the way Lena's eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way she leaned forward when she was interested in what he was saying, the way his chest felt lighter when she laughed. He was attracted to her, not just in the abstract way you notice someone is attractive, but in the specific, dangerous way that meant he was catching feelings he had no business catching. And that scared the hell out of him, because he'd been here before, with Sarah at the beginning, when everything was easy and uncomplicated and he genuinely believed he could be the man she needed. And he'd screwed it up so badly that he'd lost not just his wife, but his daughter too. What made him think he could do any better with Lena? "You got quiet," Lena observed, picking at her grilled cheese. "Where'd you go?" "Just thinking." "About?" Daniel hesitated, considered lying, brushing it off. But they'd been nothing but honest with each other so far, and he didn't want to start hiding now. "About how I'm probably going to mess this up," he said. Lena set down her sandwich. "Mess what up?" "This. Us. Whatever this is." He gestured between them. "I'm good at screwing up relationships. It's kind of my specialty. We're not in a relationship, we're just 2 people talking." "I know, but He stopped, trying to find words that didn't sound completely pathetic. "I don't want to screw this up. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like I'm not completely broken. And that terrifies me because I know my track record. I know how this ends." Lena was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Then she said, "What if it doesn't end? What if you're so busy expecting to fail that you're not seeing that maybe, just maybe, you could get it right this time?" "You don't know me well enough to say that." "No, but I know you well enough to know you're trying, that you showed up today even though you were probably scared to, that you called your daughter even though it's hard, that you're actually dealing with your shit instead of pretending it doesn't exist." She paused. "That's more than a lot of people do." Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that trying counted for something, that showing up was enough. But the voice in his head, the one that sounded suspiciously like his father, like every boss who'd ever told him he wasn't good enough, like Sarah during their worst fights, kept whispering that he was fooling himself, that he'd let Lena down just like he'd let everyone else down. "I should go," he said abruptly, reaching for his wallet. Lena's face fell. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, it's not you. I need to go." He threw cash on the table and slid out of the booth before she could respond. Made it halfway to the door before her voice stopped him. "Daniel." He turned. She was standing now, her expression caught between hurt and confusion. "Don't do this," she said. "Don't run just because you're scared." "I'm not running." "Yes, you are. You're doing exactly what you did with your marriage. Checking out because it's easier than staying and risking getting hurt." The words hit like a punch. Daniel stood there in the middle of the diner, torn between the overwhelming urge to leave and the equally overwhelming urge to go back to her, to apologize, to try. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do what?" "Be close to someone, let someone in. I'm so fucking scared I'm gonna hurt you." Lena crossed the distance between them. She was shorter than him by a few inches, but somehow she seemed to fill the space entirely. "Then hurt me," she said. "I'm not some fragile thing that's going to break the first time you mess up. I'm a grown woman who's been through hell and back. I can handle you being imperfect. What I can't handle is you running away because you've decided ahead of time that you're going to fail." They stood there close enough that Daniel could smell her shampoo, something clean and simple, not flowery. Close enough that he could see the faint scar above her eyebrow, could count the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "I don't want to be your project," he said. "Someone you think you can fix." "I don't want to fix you. I want to know you. The real you, not the sanitized version you think you're supposed to be." Something in Daniel's chest cracked wide open. Before he could talk himself out of it, he closed the remaining distance between them and kissed her. It wasn't smooth. He misjudged the angle slightly, caught more of her upper lip than he intended. She made a small, surprised noise, then her hands came up to his chest, and instead of pushing him away, she gripped his jacket and pulled him closer. The kiss deepened, went from awkward to desperate in a heartbeat. Daniel cupped her face with both hands, and she made another sound, this one closer to a whimper, and he was dimly aware that they were standing in the middle of a diner, that Rita was probably watching, that this was insane. He didn't care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena looked up at him with wide eyes. "So," she said, her voice shaky, "does this mean you're not running?" "I don't know, probably, eventually." He rested his forehead against hers. "I'm really messed up, Lena." "I know, so am I." She smiled, and it was the first time he'd seen her smile without that underlying sadness. "We can be messed up together." They went back to the booth, finished their cold food, talked for another hour about nothing and everything. And when they finally left the diner, Lena took his hand, and Daniel held on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They walked through the cold streets, past brownstones with their windows glowing warm, past the common where a few hardy souls were ice skating, past the State House with its gold dome catching the last of the fading light. They didn't have a destination, didn't need one. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Lena said suddenly. Daniel thought about it. "Sometimes I think about just disappearing, getting in my car and driving until I run out of road, starting over somewhere nobody knows me." "Why don't you?" "Because running away doesn't actually fix anything. You just take all your problems with you." He looked at her. "Your turn." Lena was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, "Sometimes I think about quitting. The force, I mean. Moving somewhere warm, opening a bakery, or something equally ridiculous. Just living a simple life where the worst thing that happens is running out of flour." "Why don't you?" "Because I'd feel like I was giving up. Like I was letting my dad down. Like all the people I've helped would suddenly not matter because I couldn't handle the hard parts." She squeezed his hand. "Stupid, right?" "No, it makes sense." They walked in silence for a while. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably another client email, another reminder that he had work to do, another piece of the mundane existence he'd been sleepwalking through. He ignored it. "I have to go back to work next week," he said. "Got a big project due. Probably going to be pulling long hours." "That's okay. I'm on leave anyway. Not like I have exciting plans." "You should do something. Take a trip. See friends. Don't just sit in your apartment replaying bad calls." Says the guy who spent Christmas alone in a diner. "Yeah, well, do as I say, not as I do." Lena stopped walking, turned to face him. "Come with me." "What?" "Take a trip with me. Just a few days. Get out of the city. Clear our heads." Daniel's immediate instinct was to say no, to list all the reasons why that was a bad idea. Work, responsibilities, Emma. The fact that they barely knew each other, the likelihood that spending concentrated time together would reveal all his flaws and make her realize she'd made a terrible mistake. But then he remembered Sarah's voice on the phone. "Start by showing up." He remembered what he told Lena at the diner. Being present matters more than being perfect. He remembered the way it had felt to kiss her, like coming up for air after being underwater too long. "Where would we go?" he asked. They ended up in a cabin outside Portland, Maine, 3 hours north of Boston, far enough to feel like escape, but close enough that Daniel could get back if Emma needed him. Lena had found it on some rental site, a small place right on the water, weathered shingles and a stone fireplace, the kind of spot that looked like it had been standing there since before either of them was born. The drive up had been quiet, not uncomfortable, just cautious. Both of them processing what they were doing, what it meant. Daniel kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, focused on the highway like it required his full attention. Lena stared out the window at the landscape rolling past, suburbs giving way to towns, giving way to forests and frozen marshland. "You're overthinking," she said about an hour in. "I'm driving." "You're white-knuckling the steering wheel and haven't said a word in 40 minutes. That's overthinking." Daniel loosened his grip. "Sorry, I'm just scared." "I know. Me too." That surprised him. He glanced over at her. "You're scared?" "Terrified." "What if we get up there and realize we have nothing to talk about? What if this whole thing was just trauma bonding, and the second we're in a normal setting, it all falls apart?" "That's exactly what I was thinking." "I know. That's why I said it out loud, so we could both stop spiraling in our own heads." She reached over and put her hand on his knee. The weight of it was grounding. We're allowed to just see what happens. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people taking a break from their shitty lives. When did you get so wise? I've been going to therapy for 3 years. You pick stuff up. They stopped for lunch at a diner in Portsmouth. Apparently, diners were becoming their thing. This one had better coffee than Murphy's and a view of the harbor, boats rocking gently in their slips despite the cold. Lena ordered clam chowder and Daniel got a lobster roll that cost twice what it should have, but tasted like summer despite the January freeze. Tell me about your dad, Daniel said. What was he like? Lena's expression shifted, went soft in a way he hadn't seen before. He was steady. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. He wasn't flashy or loud or any of that. He was just always there, you know? Always present. Even when the job was hard, and I know now it was hard, he never brought it home in a way that made us feel it. He'd walk in the door and it was like he shed all of that and just became dad. Sounds like a good man. He was. He really was. She stirred her chowder absently. My mom used to joke that he was too good, that normal people weren't supposed to be that patient, that kind. But I think it cost him. I think keeping all that darkness locked away was what killed him in the end. You think you're like him? I want to be, but I don't know how to do what he did, how to compartmentalize like that. When I go home, I bring all of it with me. Every call, every person I couldn't help. It follows me. Daniel understood that, not from police work, but from his own failures. The way his marriage had haunted him through his apartment, his daughter's absence, a constant weight. Maybe you're not supposed to compartmentalize, he said. Maybe that's not healthy. Maybe what your dad did worked for him, but it doesn't have to be your model. Then what is? If I can't turn it off, how do I survive this job? I don't know. Maybe you find someone who understands, someone you can talk to about it, someone who won't tell you to toughen up. Lena looked at him across the table, and something passed between them that didn't need words. An understanding, a promise, maybe. They got to the cabin around 4, just as the winter sun was starting its early descent. The place was exactly as advertised, small, rustic, perched on a rocky outcrop with the Atlantic spreading out gray and restless beyond. Inside smelled like wood smoke and salt air. One bedroom with a double bed, a living room with that promised fireplace, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at once. Daniel set their bags down and tried not to think about the single bed, about the implications, about how fast this was all moving. I can sleep on the couch, he said. Lena was already at the window looking out at the water. Don't be ridiculous, we're adults. We can share a bed without making it weird. Right, not weird. She turned around, caught the look on his face, and laughed. Okay, maybe a little weird, but we'll figure it out. They spent the first evening settling in, building a fire that took 3 tries and half a newspaper to actually catch, cooking pasta in the tiny kitchen while bumping into each other and laughing about it. It felt domestic in a way that should have been terrifying, but somehow wasn't, just easy. After dinner, they sat on the couch in front of the fire, both with glasses of wine from a bottle Lena had brought. The wind outside rattled the windows, the ocean a constant low roar beneath everything. Thank you, Lena said quietly. For what? For saying yes, for being here, for not running when you clearly wanted to. I still want to sometimes. I know, but you're still here. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and Daniel wrapped his arm around her without thinking about it. It felt natural. Right. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, listening to the wind and the waves. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this calm, this present. Usually his mind was 3 steps ahead or 5 steps behind, never actually where he was. But here, now, with Lena warm against his side, he was just here. Tell me something else, she said eventually. Something real. Daniel thought about it. I'm afraid I've already damaged Emma too much, that by the time I figure out how to be a decent father, it'll be too late. She'll be grown and gone, and I'll have missed my chance. You really think that? I don't know, sometimes. She's almost 12. In 6 years, she'll be off to college. That's not a lot of time to undo 6 years of being absent. So what are you going to do about it? The question was simple, but it hit hard. What was he going to do? Keep wallowing in guilt and fear? Keep letting the distance grow because it was easier than fighting through the awkwardness? I'm having lunch with her next Saturday, he said, after her soccer practice. That's a start. Yeah, if she actually shows up, if I don't find some excuse to cancel. You won't. How do you know? Because you're here. Because you drove 3 hours to spend a few days with someone you barely know because you're trying to do something different. If you can do this, you can show up for your daughter. Daniel wanted to believe that. Wanted to think that momentum from one area of his life could carry over into another. But he'd been disappointed by himself too many times to trust it. What about you? He asked. What are you afraid of? Lena was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That I'm not strong enough. That my dad was wrong about me. That I'm going to keep failing people, and eventually I'll fail someone so badly that I won't be able to come back from it. You didn't fail that guy on the bridge, didn't I? He jumped. He's probably dead. That seems like failure to me. You did everything you could. Sometimes people are going to jump no matter what you say. That's not on you. Then why does it feel like it is? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Guilt didn't follow logic. It didn't care about what was reasonable or fair. It just sat in your chest like a stone and told you that everything was your fault. I think, he said slowly, that we're both really good at blaming ourselves for things we can't control, and really bad at giving ourselves credit for the things we do right. You're probably right. Lena shifted, looked up at him. Her face was inches away, lit amber by the dying fire. Can I ask you something? Sure. Earlier, when you kissed me, was that just panic? Fear making you do something impulsive? Daniel thought about lying, about making it easier, less vulnerable. But that wasn't what they were doing here. They were being honest, painfully, uncomfortably honest. No, he said. I wanted to. I've wanted to since the diner. I'm not good at this. At being with someone, at not screwing it up. What if you stopped trying to not screw it up and just were? Just existed and let things happen without constantly monitoring yourself for mistakes? That's a really nice theory. But you don't think you can do it. I don't know if I know how. Lena reached up and touched his face, her hand cool against his cheek. Then maybe that's what we practice this weekend. Just being. No expectations. No pressure. Just two people figuring it out as they go. Before Daniel could respond, she kissed him. Soft and tentative at first, then deeper. His hands found her waist, and she shifted closer, one leg swinging over to straddle him, and suddenly the whole thing went from tentative to urgent. They broke apart after a moment, both breathing hard. Bedroom? Lena asked. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. They barely made it, stumbled through the small cabin shedding layers, laughing when Daniel tripped over his own jeans, gasping when Lena pushed him back onto the bed. And then it was just them, skin and breath and the sound of the ocean through the window. It wasn't perfect. Daniel fumbled with her bra clasp, and Lena knocked her elbow against the headboard, and at one point they had to stop because they were both laughing too hard to continue. But it was real, messy and human and real. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the heavy quilt, the room dark except for the moonlight coming through the window. Lena's head was on Daniel's chest, her hair tickling his chin. He could feel her heartbeat against his ribs, could feel her breath evening out into sleep. He should have felt panic, should have been spiraling about what they'd just done, about how fast this was moving, about all the ways he was going to inevitably screw this up. But lying there with Lena warm and solid against him, the ocean singing its endless song outside, he just felt quiet. Maybe that was enough. He woke up in the middle of the night to find her side of the bed empty. For a moment he panicked. She'd left. She'd realized what a mistake this was. She was gone. But then he heard movement in the other room. He found her in the kitchen, standing in front of the window in his t-shirt and her underwear, staring out at the dark water. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You okay?" She turned, and even in the dim light he could see she'd been crying. "Just thinking," she said. About how this is the first time in months I've felt okay, and how terrifying that is. Because what if it doesn't last? What if we go back to Boston and reality hits and this all falls apart? Daniel crossed to her, wrapped his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him, and they stood like that, watching the invisible ocean move in the darkness. Then it falls apart, he said, and we deal with it. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe we actually get to keep this. You believe that? I want to. That has to count for something. They went back to bed, and this time Lena fell asleep curled against his side, her hand resting over his heart. Daniel lay awake a while longer, listening to her breathe, trying to memorize the weight of her against him. The next morning they woke to bright sun and the smell of salt air, made coffee in the tiny kitchen and drank it on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching gulls wheel overhead. It felt stolen, this peace, like something that couldn't possibly last. Tell me about Emma's mom, Lena said. What's she like? Daniel took a long drink of coffee, buying time. Sarah's. Good. Really good. Patient, kind, organized. Everything I'm not. She tried so hard to make our marriage work, and I just kept disappointing her. You talk about her like she's a saint. She's not. She's human. She got frustrated, said things she regretted, but compared to me? He shook his head. She was trying. I was just surviving. You're being pretty hard on yourself. Am I? I missed Emma's childhood because I was too busy hating my job to quit it. I watched my marriage die in real time and did nothing to stop it. Those are just facts. Okay, but you're doing something now. You're trying to rebuild with Emma. You quit that job. You're here. Because I hit rock bottom. Because I had no other choice. Does it matter why you're doing it? You're still doing it. Daniel wanted to argue, but he was tired of arguing with himself. Tired of the constant internal prosecution, the endless recitation of his failures. Maybe Lena was right. Maybe trying counted for something even if it came late. They spent the day walking along the rocky beach, collecting sea glass and skipping stones across the waves. Lena told him about growing up in South Boston, about her brother who'd moved to San Francisco and worked in tech, about her mother who still lived in the same house Lena had grown up in and refused to move even though the neighborhood had changed around her. Daniel told her about his own parents, both dead now, his father from a heart attack 5 years ago, his mother from cancer 2 years after that, about how his father had been a lawyer, successful and cold, who'd never understood why Daniel went into finance instead of law, about how his mother had mediated between them, trying to keep the peace, wearing herself down in the process. Do you think that's why you checked out? Lena asked. With Sarah? Because that's what you learned growing up? That it's easier to be distant than to deal with conflict? Probably. That and 1,000 other reasons. Therapist I saw after the divorce said I had intimacy issues. He laughed, bitter. Like that wasn't obvious. You're not distant now. No, but give it time. I'll find a way to mess it up. Stop. Stop what? Predicting your own failure. It's exhausting and it's not fair to either of us. She stopped walking, turned to face him. I get that you're scared. I'm scared too. But if you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, you're going to miss what's actually happening right now. Which is? Two people who care about each other trying to figure out if they can make it work. That's it. That's all this has to be. The wind whipped Lena's hair around her face, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and Daniel thought she'd never looked more beautiful. Not in a poetic way, just in a real human way. Someone who was standing in front of him, offering him something he didn't think he deserved. I care about you, he said. A lot. More than I probably should after a week. Same. But I don't know if I can be what you need. I don't know if I'm capable of... Lena put her hand over his mouth. Stop. Just for today, can you stop deciding ahead of time that you're going to fail? Can we just be here and be okay with that? Daniel nodded against her hand. She lowered it and kissed him, tasting like coffee and salt air. That night they cooked together, or tried to. Daniel burned the chicken and Lena oversalted the vegetables, and they ended up ordering pizza from a place in town that delivered. They ate it in front of the fire, talking about nothing important, and it was perfect in its imperfection. Later, when they were back in bed, Lena traced patterns on his chest in the dark. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said. Daniel thought about it. Sometimes I dream that Emma's older, college age, and in the dream she won't talk to me, won't even look at me. And I know it's because I missed too much, because I wasn't there when it mattered. And I wake up feeling like it's already happened, like I've already lost her completely. Lena was quiet for a moment. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. No, but I know you're not going to let it. You're going to show up on Saturday. You're going to keep showing up. And even if it's hard, even if she's resistant at first, you're going to keep trying because that's what you do now. You show up. How are you so sure? Because I've watched you this week. You could have run a dozen times. From me, from this. But you didn't. You stayed. And if you can do that with someone you barely know, you can do it with your daughter. Daniel pulled her closer, pressed his face into her hair. What if I let you down? Then you apologize and we figure it out. That's how this works. Nobody's perfect. We're both going to mess up. The question is whether we're willing to stick around and fix it, or whether we're going to run the first time it gets hard. I've always run before. I know, but you're not running now. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Daniel slept better than he had in years. No dreams, no nightmares, just deep, quiet sleep. Their last full day in Maine passed too quickly. They drove into Portland for lunch, walked around the old port looking in shops neither of them had any intention of buying from. It was painfully normal, painfully domestic. The kind of thing couples did. The thought should have terrified him, but it didn't. It just felt right. They were driving back to the cabin when Lena's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her whole body tensed. "It's my captain," she said. "Answer it." She did, putting it on speaker. "Brooks." "Lena, it's Henderson. I wanted to give you an update on the bridge call." Daniel watched her face go pale. He reached over and took her hand. "Okay," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The guy made it. He's in ICU, but he's stable. Doctors think he's going to pull through." The breath Lena had been holding came out all at once. "Oh, thank God. I wanted you to know. I know it was weighing on you. You did good work that night. Sometimes people jump anyway, but you kept him talking long enough for us to get resources in place. The dive team was ready. They got to him fast. That's because of you. Thank you, Captain. See you when you're back. Take care of yourself." He hung up. Lena sat there staring at her phone, tears streaming down her face. "He's alive," she said. "He's alive." Daniel pulled the car over and she fell into his arms, sobbing. Not sad crying, relief, pure, overwhelming relief. "It's okay," he murmured into her hair. "You're okay. He's okay. I thought I'd killed him. I know, but you didn't. You did everything right." They sat there on the side of the road for a long time, Lena crying into his shoulder while he held her. And Daniel realized something. This was it. This was what showing up looked like. Not fixing everything, not having all the answers, just being there, being present, holding someone while they fell apart and trusting that they'd pull themselves back together. He could do that. Maybe that was enough. That night, their last night in the cabin, they lay in bed talking about going back, about what happened next. "I don't want this to end," Lena said quietly. "It doesn't have to. But it changes, right? We go back to Boston and we have jobs and responsibilities and all the regular life stuff that makes things complicated. Yeah, but we figure it out." Oh, he rolled to face her. "I want to try. With you. For real. Not just a weekend escape. Even though you're terrified?" "Especially because I'm terrified. Because that means it matters." Lena kissed him, slow and deep. "Okay, we try." They made love again that night, but different from before. Slower, more intentional, like they were trying to memorize each other. And afterward, lying in the dark, listening to the ocean, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not healed, not fixed, but different. Like maybe, just maybe, he could be the person Lena seemed to think he was. They left the next morning, the cabin already feeling like a memory. The drive back was quieter than the drive up, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Daniel kept glancing over at Lena, at her profile against the window, trying to convince himself that this was real, that it wasn't going to disappear the second they crossed back into the city. They were about an hour outside Boston when Lena's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her whole face changed. "What?" Daniel asked. "It's dispatch. There's been a situation. They need me. But you're on leave. I know, but she looked torn. It's a hostage situation, active scene. They're asking for everyone available. Daniel's chest went tight. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. She was already texting back. Can you drop me at the station? Lena, please, Daniel. I have to do this. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that she had just spent 3 days learning to let go, to not carry all the weight. But he could see in her face that this wasn't a choice. This was who she was. Okay, he said. I'll drop you. The rest of the drive was tense. Lena was already shifting into cop mode, her whole demeanor changing. By the time they pulled up to the station, she was someone different. Not the woman he'd spent 3 days with. Officer Brooks. She kissed him quickly before getting out. I'll call you when I can. Be careful. Always am. And then she was gone, jogging into the station, and Daniel sat there in his car watching her disappear, feeling like he'd just lost something he'd barely had time to hold. Daniel drove home in a daze, his hands operating the car on autopilot, while his mind replayed Lena disappearing through those station doors. The shift had been instant. 1 second she was the woman he'd spent 3 days with, soft and present in his, and the next she was Officer Brooks, all business and duty, already gone before she'd even left the car. He shouldn't have been surprised. He'd known what she did for a living, known the job demanded everything from her. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it in his chest were two different things. His apartment felt smaller than usual when he walked in, emptier. The 3 days away had given him distance from it, and now returning felt like putting on old clothes that didn't fit right anymore. He dropped his bag by the door and stood in the middle of his living room, unsure what to do with himself. His phone buzzed. For a second, his heart jumped, Lena. But it was just a work email. Client asking about timeline on a report. The real world, asserting itself. He tried to work, opened his laptop, stared at spreadsheets that meant nothing, closed it again. Tried to watch TV but couldn't focus. Every few minutes he'd check his phone. No messages, no calls. By 8 that evening, he was pacing. The news was showing coverage of the hostage situation, some kind of robbery gone wrong at a convenience store in Dorchester. 2 suspects, 1 hostage. They were showing aerial footage from a helicopter, police cars everywhere. That familiar scene of controlled chaos that probably felt anything but controlled if you were in the middle of it. Was Lena there? Was she safe? Daniel had no way of knowing, and it was driving him insane. He texted her at 9. Hope you're okay. Thinking about you. No response. At 10, he tried to sleep and failed. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind conjuring every worst-case scenario. Lena hurt. Lena shot. Lena making a split-second decision that went wrong and having to live with it. He was being ridiculous. She'd been a cop for 6 years. She knew what she was doing. But that didn't stop his brain from spinning disaster after disaster. At 11:30, his phone rang. He grabbed it so fast he nearly dropped it. Lena? Hey. Her voice sounded wrong, flat, exhausted. Can you come get me? Where are you? Still at the station. I shouldn't be driving. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He threw on clothes and was out the door in under a minute. Rules about speeding be damned. Made it to the station in 12 minutes and found her sitting on the curb outside, still in her uniform, staring at nothing. Daniel's heart dropped. He'd seen that look before, on Christmas night in the diner. That 1,000-yard stare that meant something had broken. He got out of the car and she looked up at him like she was seeing him through water, stood slowly, her movements careful, and walked over. He opened his arms and she collapsed into them, not crying, just holding on like she was drowning. Let's get you home, he said quietly. She shook her head against his chest. Not my place. Can't be there right now. Too many... She stopped, swallowed hard. Can we go to yours? Of course. The drive back was silent. Lena stared out the window, her hands gripping her knees so tight her knuckles were white. Daniel wanted to ask what happened but could tell she wasn't ready to talk. So he just drove, one hand on the wheel and the other reaching over to rest on hers. Back at his apartment, she sat on his couch and he brought her water. She didn't drink, sat next to her and waited. The clock on his wall ticked loud in the quiet. The hostage died, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's stomach dropped. Lena, we had them surrounded, had negotiators talking them down. Everything was going according to protocol. And then one of the suspects panicked, and her voice broke. He shot her, just shot her, and we rushed in and it was too late. She was already gone. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I was there. I was supposed to help, and I watched it happen. You did everything you could. Did I? She finally looked at him, and her eyes were dead, empty. Because it doesn't feel like I did. It feels like I stood there with a gun on my hip and all this training, and I couldn't do a single thing that mattered. That woman is dead, and I couldn't stop it. Daniel pulled her close, and this time she did cry. Not the relieved sobs from the car earlier when she'd learned the bridge jumper survived. This was something darker, deeper. The sound of something fundamental breaking. He held her while she shook, murmured things he knew were inadequate, tried to be present in a situation where presence felt laughably insufficient. What good was holding someone when they were falling apart like this? What good was being there when there was nothing he could actually do? But he stayed, didn't let go, didn't try to fix it or make it better with empty platitudes, just held her and let her break. Eventually the crying stopped. Lena pulled back, wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Sorry. Don't apologize. I'm a mess. You're human. You watch someone die. You're allowed to be a mess. She laughed, bitter and sharp. My captain said the same thing my therapist is going to say, that I need to process, that I need to remember I can't control everything, that sometimes people die and it's not on me. She looked at him. But it feels like it's on me. It feels like if I'd been better, smarter, faster, something, she'd still be alive. You can't think like that. Why not? It's true. No, it's not. The person who killed her is the one who pulled the trigger, not you, not your team, him. He made that choice. But we put him in that position. We cornered him. What if we'd given him more time? What if we'd backed off, let him feel less trapped? What if he'd killed her anyway? What if backing off had made him bolder? You can play the what-if game forever, Lena. It'll destroy you. She was quiet for a long time, her head resting on his shoulder, her breathing slowly evening out. Daniel stroked her hair, felt the tension in her body gradually release. I don't know if I can do this anymore, she said quietly. Do what? The job. All of it. Watching people die. Watching people hurt each other, carrying all this weight and pretending I'm okay. You don't have to pretend with me. I know. But everywhere else? The station, my mom, everyone expects me to be strong, to be like my dad. And I'm not him. I can't compartmentalize like he did. I can't just turn it off. Then don't. Maybe you're not supposed to. Then what? Just fall apart every time something bad happens? That's not sustainable. That's not... She stopped, her voice breaking again. I wanted to make him proud. My dad. I thought if I did this job, if I was good at it, it would mean something. But all it's doing is breaking me. Daniel thought about his own father, about spending his entire 20s trying to prove something to a man who'd never approved of anything he did, about how that desperate need for validation had pushed him into a career he'd hated, a life that had slowly suffocated him. Your dad would be proud, he said. Not because you're a cop, because you're you, because you care so much it hurts. That's not weakness, Lena. That's strength. Doesn't feel like strength. No. It probably feels like drowning, but you're still here, you're still trying. That counts. She turned to look at him, her face inches from his. What if I quit? What if I just walked away? Then you walk away. It's your life. You get to decide. You'd be okay with that? Dating a former cop who couldn't hack it? I'd be okay with dating someone who knew when to stop hurting themselves. And for the record, I'm not dating a cop. I'm dating you. The job is just what you do. It's not who you are. Something shifted in Lena's expression. Not fixed, but softer. Like maybe she was starting to believe him. Can I stay here tonight? She asked. I don't want to be alone. You can stay as long as you want. They went to bed even though it was barely past midnight. Lena borrowed one of his t-shirts and they lay in the dark, her back pressed against his chest, his arm around her waist. He could feel her breathing, feel the tension still coiled in her muscles. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "About anything. I just need to hear something that isn't inside my head." So Daniel talked. About Emma. About the lunch they had planned for Saturday. About how terrified he was that she wouldn't show up or wouldn't want to be there. About how he'd been practicing what to say to her, running through conversations in his head that always ended with her walking away. "She won't walk away," Lena said. "You don't know that." "No, but I know you won't let her. You'll show up and you'll try, and even if it's awkward or hard, you'll keep trying. That's who you are now. You have more faith in me than I have in myself." Good. Someone should. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in his small bed, and when Daniel woke in the early morning light, Lena was still there, still solid and real against him. Not a dream, not something that disappeared in daylight. She woke up an hour later, disoriented at first, then remembering. He watched the weight settle back onto her shoulders as reality crashed back in. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got hit by a truck." She sat up, rubbed her face. "I need coffee and a shower, and maybe to never think again." "I can help with the first two." He made coffee while she showered, scrambled eggs that were only slightly burned. They ate in silence, both of them moving carefully around each other, like they weren't sure what the new normal was supposed to look like. "I have to go in today," Lena said. "Debrief, paperwork, all the fun aftermath stuff. You want me to come with you?" She looked surprised. "You do that? If you want me there, yeah. She stopped, something vulnerable crossing her face. "Yeah, I'd like that." So he went with her, sat in the waiting area of the station while she disappeared into offices and conference rooms, watched cops come and go, some giving him curious looks, most ignoring him entirely. He felt out of place in his civilian clothes, surrounded by uniforms and bulletproof vests, and the constant crackle of radios. After 2 hours, Lena emerged looking hollowed out. "Let's get out of here." They drove aimlessly for a while, neither of them wanting to go back to either of their apartments. Ended up at a park overlooking the harbor, sitting on a bench while seagulls screamed overhead and the wind cut through their jackets. "They're putting me on administrative leave," Lena said. "Mandatory. 2 weeks minimum while they investigate." "Investigate what? You didn't do anything wrong." "Standard procedure after an incident. Make sure everything was by the book. Make sure I'm not a liability." She laughed, hollow. "Joke's on them. I am a liability. To myself, if nothing else." "You're not." "Daniel, I'm falling apart. I cried for an hour in the captain's office. I can barely keep my hands from shaking. If that's not a liability, I don't know what is. That's called being human, having a normal reaction to watching someone die. Normal doesn't cut it in this job. Normal gets people killed." They sat in silence for a while, watching boats move across the harbor. Daniel thought about what to say, how to help, but kept coming up empty. Sometimes there was no help. Sometimes you just had to sit with the wreckage. "My meeting with Emma is tomorrow," he said finally. "Saturday, after her soccer practice. You nervous?" "Terrified." "Good. That means you care. What if she doesn't want to see me?" "Then you try again and again, until she believes you're serious." Daniel looked at her. "Is that what you're going to do? With the job? Try again?" Lena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Right now I can't imagine going back. Can't imagine putting the uniform on again. But maybe that's just the shock talking. Maybe in 2 weeks I'll feel different. And if you don't, then I don't. Then I figure out what comes next. You know I'll support you either way, right? Whatever you decide." She turned to him, eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Why are you being so good to me? You barely know me. We've known each other for what, a week and a half? You don't owe me this." "I don't think that's how it works. I don't think caring about someone is about time or owing. I think you meet someone and they matter, and you show up because that's what you do for people who matter. Is that what I am? Someone who matters?" "Yeah, you are." She kissed him then, desperate and hard, like she was trying to prove to herself that something good could still exist in the middle of all this pain. Daniel kissed her back, held her close, wished he could absorb some of her hurt into himself so she didn't have to carry it all alone. They spent the rest of the day together, Got lunch neither of them had much appetite for. Walked through the public garden even though it was freezing. Talked about nothing and everything. By evening, Lena seemed steadier, the worst of the shock wearing off into something more manageable. I should go home, she said when they were back at his apartment. Face my own space. Stop hiding. You're not hiding. You're recovering. Maybe, but I can't stay here forever. I need to figure out how to be alone with this. You don't have to be alone with it. That's the whole point. I know, but I need to know that I can be, that I'm not going to fall apart the second you're not there to hold me together. Daniel understood that. The need to prove to yourself that you could survive on your own, even if you didn't have to. Okay, but call me if you need anything, anytime. I will. She gathered her things, stopped at the door. Thank you. For yesterday? For today? For not running when I was a mess. I told you, I'm done running. We'll see if that's still true when things get really hard. They are really hard. You watched someone die. If I can handle that, I can handle anything. She smiled, small and sad. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. I'm trying, Lena. That's all I can do. I know, me too. She left and Daniel stood in his doorway watching her drive away, that familiar feeling of loss settling over him. But different this time. Not permanent, just distance that could be closed again. He spent that evening preparing for tomorrow, mentally rehearsing what he'd say to Emma, how he'd approach the conversation. Every scenario he ran through in his head ended badly. Her refusing to come, her sitting there stone-faced and silent, her telling him it was too late, that she didn't need him anymore. By the time he went to bed, his stomach was in knots. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of January day that made you question why anyone lived in New England. Daniel got to the soccer fields in Newton half an hour early, sat in his car watching girls in various shades of athletic gear run drills on the frozen grass. He spotted Emma easily. She had his dark hair, but Sarah's build, tall for almost 12, moving with the kind of unself-conscious grace that reminded him she wasn't a little kid anymore. She was becoming a person, a whole separate person with her own life and thoughts and dreams that had nothing to do with him. The realization hit harder than he expected. Practice ended at noon. Daniel watched Emma grab her water bottle, laugh at something one of her teammates said. She looked happy, adjusted, like she had a whole life that functioned perfectly well without him in it. He almost drove away, almost decided this was a mistake, that he'd just be disrupting her good thing. But then he remembered Lena's voice. You show up because that's what you do for people who matter. Emma mattered, more than anything. He got out of the car and walked across the parking lot. Emma saw him and her whole face changed. Surprise, then something harder to read. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown, just careful. Hey, Em, he said when he was close enough. Hi. She adjusted the strap of her gym bag. You actually came. The words stung because they were earned. I said I would. Yeah, you've said that before. Fair. Daniel swallowed hard. I know, I've let you down a lot. I'm sorry. Emma looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her trying to decide whether to believe him. Mom's not here. David dropped me off. I know. I'm not here to see your mom. I'm here to see you. I thought we could grab lunch, that burger place I mentioned. I have homework. What if we make it quick? An hour, that's all. Please, Em, I want to spend time with you. She studied the ground, kicked at a frozen patch of grass. Fine, but I have to be home by 3. Deal. They drove to the restaurant in Daniel's car. Emma plugged into her phone in the passenger seat, creating a wall of teenage silence that felt impenetrable. Daniel tried to think of something to say that wouldn't sound forced or desperate. Came up empty. The burger place was half full, families and teenage groups crowding the booth. They found a table in the corner and ordered bacon cheeseburger for Emma, regular for Daniel, fries to share. So, Daniel said, when the awkward silence had stretched too long. How's school? Fine. What's your favorite class? I don't know. They're all okay. You still playing soccer year-round? Yeah. Every answer was a wall, every question hitting brick. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to talk to him. Why had he thought this would work? But then he remembered something Lena had said. About how Emma was almost 12, figuring out how to be a person, and that was hard enough without her dad disappearing. About how he had to be the adult, had to bridge the gap. "I'm sorry," he said, abandoning the script he'd rehearsed, "for not being there, for all the times I promised and didn't show up, for letting work be more important than you. I was a terrible dad, and you deserve better." Emma looked up from her phone, surprised. "Okay, I mean it. I screwed up for years. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix it, but I want to try. I want to actually be present in your life if you'll let me. Why now?" Her voice was guarded, but there was something underneath it. Hope, maybe. Or just curiosity. "Why do you suddenly care?" "I've always cared. I didn't know how to show it. I was so wrapped up in my own problems that I couldn't see what I was doing to you, to your mom, to everyone." He took a breath. "But I'm trying to be different now. Better. And I know you probably don't believe me, and that's fair. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove it." Emma was quiet, her burger sitting untouched in front of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Do you even want to be my dad? Or is this just because you feel guilty?" The question cracked something open in Daniel's chest. "I want to be your dad. More than anything. You're the best thing I've ever done, Em. The only thing I've done that actually matters. And I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough to fight for." "I didn't feel like I wasn't enough." Her eyes were bright now, threatening tears. "I felt like you didn't want me. Like I was just this obligation you had to deal with. That's not—" Daniel stopped, forced himself to be honest. "Maybe it felt that way sometimes, because I was so miserable. But that was never about you. That was about me being a coward. About me not knowing how to be happy or present or any of the things a good parent is supposed to be." "David's always there," Emma said quietly. "He comes to all my games, helps with homework, makes dinner with Mom. He's there. I know, and I'm glad you have him. Glad you have someone who shows up. But that doesn't mean there's no room for me too, if you want me." "Do you promise?" She looked at him now, really looked at him, and she was still his little girl under all that almost 12-year-old armor. "Do you promise you'll actually try?" "I promise. And I know that doesn't mean much right now, but I'm going to prove it every week, every month, until you believe me." Emma nodded slowly, picked up her burger, took a bite. "Okay, we can try." It wasn't a miracle. Wasn't an instant fix. But it was something. A crack in the wall. A place to start. They spent the next hour actually talking. About Emma's soccer team, about her best friend who'd moved to California over the summer, about the science project she was working on about ocean acidification. Daniel listened, really listened, asked questions, didn't check his phone once, and slowly, gradually, Emma relaxed, started smiling, started being the kid he remembered instead of the defensive stranger she'd become. When he dropped her off at Sarah's house at 3, she actually hugged him, quick and awkward, but real. "Can we do this again?" she asked. "Like, regularly?" "Yeah, every week if you want." "Okay, text me." "I will." He watched her jog up the walkway to the house, watched her disappear inside, sat in his car for a minute just breathing, feeling like maybe, possibly, he hadn't completely destroyed everything. His phone buzzed. Lena. How did it go? He called her instead of texting. "It went okay, better than okay. We actually talked." "Told you." He could hear the smile in her voice. "How are you doing?" "Hanging in there. Better today. Still can't believe any of this is real, but I'm working on it." "You want company later?" "Yeah, but come to my place? I think I'm ready to have you in my space." "I'll be there at 6. They hung up and Daniel sat there for another minute, his chest feeling lighter than it had in months. Years, maybe. It wasn't fixed. None of it was fixed. He still had a mountain to climb with Emma. Lena was still processing trauma that would take months or years to work through. They were still two fundamentally broken people trying to figure out how to not be broken together. But they were trying, actually trying, showing up for each other and for themselves. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Lena's apartment was smaller than Daniel had imagined, a third-floor walk-up in Somerville with slanted ceilings and windows that overlooked a street lined with bare trees. It was tidy but lived in, walls covered with framed photos. Her parents, her brother, a younger Lena in a police academy graduation photo that made her look impossibly young. "It's not much," she said, watching him take it in. "It's you," he said, and meant it. They ordered takeout and ate on her couch, some nature documentary playing on mute in the background. Lena picked at her pad thai, eating maybe a quarter of it before pushing the container away. "Still not sleeping?" Daniel asked. "Not really. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. The hostage. She was young, maybe mid-20s, had this tattoo on her wrist of a bird. I keep thinking about how someone gave her that tattoo, how she chose it for some reason, how she had a whole life with meaning and choices, and then it just ended. You're allowed to be haunted by that. Yeah, but for how long? At what point does it become an excuse? At what point do I need to just get over it and move on?" Daniel thought about his own ghosts, the way he still carried guilt about his marriage, about Emma's childhood, about every moment he'd failed to show up, years later, and it still sat in his chest like a stone. "I don't think you get over things like that," he said. "I think you just learn to carry them, learn to live with the weight." "That's depressing." "Maybe, but it's honest." Lena pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. She looked small like that, younger than her years, vulnerable in a way that made Daniel want to protect her from everything, which he knew was both impossible and not what she needed. "I talked to my captain again today," she said. "Told him I'm thinking about not coming back." "What did he say?" "That I should take the 2 weeks to think about it, not make any big decisions while I'm still processing. But I don't think time is going to change anything. I think I'm done." "Okay." She looked at him, surprised. "That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say? That you should push through it? That you should ignore what your gut is telling you? I'm not going to do that. My mom will be devastated. She already thinks I'm too soft for the job. This will just prove her right. Your mom doesn't have to live your life, you do. Easy to say. Doesn't make it less true." Daniel shifted closer, took her hand. "What do you want, Lena? Not what your mom wants. Not what your dad would have wanted. Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at their joined hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I want to wake up without dread. I want to go to bed without seeing dead people behind my eyelids. I want to feel like I'm doing something good instead of just bearing witness to how terrible people can be to each other." "Then quit. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I've spent 6 years working toward this. Because my dad gave his whole life to the force. Because if I quit now, what does that say about me? That I couldn't hack it? That I was too weak? It says you're smart enough to know when something is destroying you. That takes more strength than just pushing through." Lena's eyes went bright with tears. "I feel like I'm letting everyone down." "The only person you're letting down is yourself if you stay in a job that's killing you." She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, held her while she cried quietly into his shoulder. Not the desperate sobs from the night of the hostage situation, but something steadier. Grief, maybe. For the version of herself who'd thought she could do this, who'd believed that following in her father's footsteps would make her feel close to him. "What would I even do?" she asked when she'd pulled herself together. "Being a cop is all I know." "You'd figure it out. People reinvent themselves all the time. I did." "Yeah, and look how that turned out. You're a freelance consultant living in a depressing apartment doing work you're not passionate about." "Exactly, that. And I'm happier than I was before, because at least I'm not actively miserable. At least I can sleep at night. Sometimes the bar is that low, and that's okay." Lena laughed, watery and surprised. "That's the saddest pep talk I've ever heard." "I'm not good at pep talks. I'm good at being honest about how hard everything is." "Yeah, you are." She kissed him, soft and slow. "Thank you for not trying to fix me. I couldn't if I tried, but I can sit here with you while you figure it out." They spent the rest of the evening in comfortable silence, watching the documentary. Neither of them was paying attention to, just being present with each other. Around midnight, Lena's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her whole body tensed. My mom, she said. She wants to meet for breakfast tomorrow. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. If I'm really going to quit, I need to tell her, face to face. Want me to come with you? Lena looked surprised again. You do that? If you want moral support, yeah. She's going to hate you. She hates everyone I date, thinks no one is good enough for me. Is anyone good enough for you? No, but you're closer than most. She smiled, tired but genuine. Okay, come with me. Maybe having you there will keep her from going full guilt trip. The next morning, they met Lena's mother at a diner in South Boston, different from Murphy's, but similar enough to feel familiar. Patricia Brooks was exactly what Daniel had expected. Late 60s, steel gray hair, sharp eyes that assessed him the moment he walked through the door. She had Lena's bone structure, but none of her softness. Mom, this is Daniel, Lena said, sliding into the booth across from her mother. Mrs. Brooks, Daniel said, extending his hand. Nice to meet you. Patricia shook it with the grip of someone who'd spent years not taking any crap from anyone. Lena didn't mention she was bringing someone. Last-minute decision, Lena said quickly. I wanted you to meet him. They ordered coffee, and Patricia spent the first 15 minutes interrogating Daniel. What he did for work, where he lived, what his intentions were with her daughter. Daniel answered honestly, trying not to feel like he was being deposed. Finally, Patricia turned to Lena. So, what's this about? Lena took a breath. Daniel reached under the table and squeezed her hand. I'm quitting the force, she said. I've already made up my mind. I just wanted to tell you in person. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something hardened in her eyes. Because of the hostage situation. Because of a lot of things. That was just the final straw. So you're giving up, running away because things got hard. Mom, your father faced situations like that all the time, worse even, and he never quit. He understood that the job was bigger than his feelings. Lena's jaw tightened. Dad also died at 53 from a heart attack because he never dealt with any of it. Because he kept it all locked inside until it literally killed him. I'm not doing that. Your father died serving his community. That meant something. And what about us? Lena's voice was rising now, years of buried resentment coming to the surface. What about me and Tommy? Did we mean something? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like the job always came first, like we were just accessories to his real life. That's not fair, isn't it? How many dinners did he miss? How many school events? How many nights did you wait up not knowing if he was coming home? Lena was shaking now. I love Dad. I miss him every single day. But I'm not going to martyr myself trying to live up to some impossible standard he set. I want to actually live, Mom, not just survive. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, her coffee cup held in both hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I worried about this. When you joined, I worried you were too sensitive for it. Because I care about people? Because I let things affect me? Yeah, I guess I am too sensitive, Lena's voice cracked. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the world needs more people who are too sensitive and fewer people who can watch someone die and just move on. The world needs people who can do the hard jobs without falling apart. Then let someone else do them. I'm done. Patricia looked at Daniel then, assessing. And you support this? Her throwing away 6 years of training? I support her making decisions about her own life, Daniel said carefully. And for what it's worth, I don't think she's throwing anything away. I think she's choosing not to destroy herself. That takes courage. You don't know my daughter. Maybe not as well as you do, but I know she's been carrying weight that's not hers to carry, and I know she deserves to be happy. Patricia's expression was unreadable. She turned back to Lena. What will you do? For work? I don't know yet. I have some savings. I'll figure it out. And if you regret this, then I'll deal with that too. But right now, staying is killing me. So this is what I'm doing. The breakfast continued in tense silence, small talk that felt forced and hollow. When they finally left, Patricia hugged Lena stiffly. I still think you're making a mistake, she said. But you're an adult. It's your choice to make. Thanks, Mom. Lena's voice was tight. I think. They watched Patricia walk to her car, Lena's shoulders slumping the moment her mother was out of sight. That went well, she said sarcastically. Could have been worse. She called me weak. In so many words, that's what she was saying. No, she's scared for you. She doesn't know how to say it without sounding critical, but that's what it is. Fear. Lena looked at him. How do you know that? Because it's what my dad did. Every criticism was really just fear that I was making my life harder than it needed to be. He just didn't know how to express it any other way. They drove back to Lena's apartment and she was quiet the whole way, processing. When they got inside, she kicked off her shoes and collapsed on the couch. I need to officially submit my resignation tomorrow, she said. Make it real. How are you feeling about it? Terrified. Relieved. Like I'm standing on a cliff about to jump, and I have no idea if there's water at the bottom or just rocks. At least you're jumping. That's something. She looked at him, something complicated in her expression. What are we doing, Daniel? Really? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? This. Us. We've known each other for 2 weeks. I'm quitting my job. You're trying to rebuild with your daughter. We're both a mess. What are we doing? Daniel sat down next to her, thought about how to answer. I don't know. I just know that being with you makes me feel less alone, less broken. And I'm not ready to walk away from that. Even though it's complicated? Especially because it's complicated. Easy doesn't mean good. We're both figuring out how to be different people than we were. Maybe we can figure it out together. What if we can't? What if we're just two drowning people clinging to each other? Then at least we're not drowning alone. Lena smiled, sad and beautiful. You have a very dark view of relationships. I have a realistic view. Love isn't some fairy tale where everything magically works out. It's choosing to show up for someone even when it's hard. It's being there for the bad days and the good days and all the boring days in between. Is that what this is? Love? The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Daniel's instinct was to backtrack, to say he'd gotten carried away, to keep things safe and undefined. But he was tired of being safe, tired of running from anything that might hurt. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think it could be, if we let it. Lena leaned her head on his shoulder. I think I could love you if I'm not too broken to do it right. I don't think there's a right way to do it. I think you just do it and hope for the best. They sat like that for a long time, tangled together on her couch, while the January light faded outside. Daniel thought about Emma, about the lunch they'd had, about the promise to see each other every week. He thought about Lena submitting her resignation, about the terror and relief of walking away from something that was destroying you. He thought about his own life, the job he didn't hate but didn't love, the apartment that still felt temporary, the slow process of becoming someone he didn't completely despise. None of it was perfect. None of it was fixed, but it was honest. And maybe that was enough. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Daniel had lunch with Emma every Saturday, sometimes just the two of them, sometimes including Sarah and David. The conversations got easier. Emma started texting him during the week, random stuff about school or funny things that happened at soccer. Small things, normal things, the kind of communication he'd never thought he'd get back. Lena officially resigned from the police force, spent a week sleeping 12 hours a day, her body catching up on years of accumulated exhaustion. Then she started looking at other options, social work programs, crisis counseling certifications, ways to help people without carrying a gun. I still want to do something that matters, she told Daniel one night. They were at his place cooking dinner together, or trying to. The chicken was dry and the vegetables were mushy, but they ate it anyway. Everything matters if you care about it, he said. That's very Hallmark card of you. I'm serious. You spent 6 years trying to save everyone. Maybe now you can just save yourself. What if that's selfish? What if it's necessary? She thought about that while they did dishes, hands bumping in the soapy water. I keep waiting to regret it, the resignation, but I don't. I just feel lighter. Good. Is it weird that I'm not more broken up about it? No, I think it means you made the right choice. On Valentine's Day, a holiday Daniel had spent the last 6 years actively avoiding, he took Lena to dinner. Nothing fancy, just a small Italian place in the North End with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. They split a bottle of red and talked about everything and nothing. I met with a program director yesterday, Lena said. For a master's in social work, they have a focus on crisis intervention. It's 2 years, but I could do it part-time while working. That sounds perfect for you. I'd be starting over, again, at 31. So what? Better than staying somewhere you're miserable. Is that what you're doing with the consulting? Daniel considered that. Honestly, I don't know. It pays the bills, gives me flexibility to see Emma. But am I passionate about it? No. Do I wake up excited to work? Definitely not. So what would you do? If you could do anything? He'd never really let himself think about it. The question felt too big, too indulgent. But sitting across from Lena, her face open and genuinely curious, he tried. I used to like teaching, he said slowly. Back in college, I was a TA for a statistics class. I liked breaking down complex concepts, making them accessible. I liked when something clicked for someone. So teach. I'm 42. I'd need to go back to school, get certified. It would take years. You'll be 42 whether you do it or not. Might as well do something you actually care about. The idea sat in his chest, strange and uncomfortable and kind of exciting. I'll think about it. Don't just think about it. Actually consider it. You're the one who keeps telling me life is too short to be miserable. Yeah, well, easier to give advice than take it. Then we'll both do it. I'll go back to school for social work. You look into teaching programs. We'll be middle-aged students together. Daniel laughed. That sounds terrible. Yeah, it does. But also kind of great. They walked home through the cold streets, hand in hand, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Not certainty. Not some guarantee that everything would work out. Just the sense that maybe, possibly, things could be different. Better. In March, Daniel went to one of Emma's soccer games. Sat in the bleachers with Sarah and David, cheering when Emma scored a goal. Afterward, Emma ran over, sweaty and grinning. Did you see that? She asked, breathless. I saw it. That was amazing. Coach says if I keep it up, I might make varsity next year. You will. I know you will. Emma's smile was pure joy, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt like maybe he hadn't completely failed her. Maybe there was still time to be the father she deserved. Sarah pulled him aside while Emma was getting her stuff. She's different lately, she said. Happier. I think having you around more is good for her. Yeah? Yeah, you're actually showing up, Daniel. Keep doing that. I will, I promise. And he meant it. Not as an empty promise, but as a commitment. To Emma. To himself. To the person he was trying to become. In April, Lena started her social work program. Daniel helped her move textbooks into her apartment, joked about how much reading she had ahead of her. She was nervous but excited, a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. Thank you, she said that night. They were on her couch, her head in his lap, while he played with her hair. For what? For not running. For staying even when I was falling apart. For making me believe I could do something different. You did that yourself. I just stuck around to watch. You did more than that. She looked up at him. I love you. I should have said it before, but I was scared. But I'm saying it now. I love you. The words landed in Daniel's chest, warm and terrifying. I love you too. Even though we're both disasters? Especially because we're both disasters. She pulled him down and kissed him, and it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. New and familiar at the same time. In May, Daniel applied to a teaching certification program at UMass Boston. Got accepted. Spent a week freaking out about the commitment, the cost, the time. Then signed up anyway. We're really doing this, he told Lena. They were at Murphy's, their place, where everything had started. Same booth? Same terrible coffee. We're actually trying to build something better. Yeah, we are. She reached across the table and took his hand. Scary, isn't it? Terrifying. But good? Yeah, good. By summer, life had settled into something almost normal. Daniel had lunch with Emma every week, sometimes dinner too. She told him about school drama, about the boy she maybe liked but wasn't sure, about her dreams of studying marine biology in college. He listened. Actually listened. Didn't try to fix everything or give advice unless she asked, just showed up and was present. Lena was thriving in her program, getting A's in all her classes, talking about her plans to work with domestic violence survivors or people in crisis. She'd found her calling, Daniel thought, not in saving everyone, but in helping people save themselves. And Daniel was teaching, Student teaching, anyway. High school statistics. It was hard and frustrating, and some days the kids drove him insane. But some days a concept clicked for someone, and they'd light up with understanding, and those days made everything else worth it. On a Saturday in July, Daniel and Lena took Emma to the aquarium, Emma's pick. They wandered through the exhibits, Emma spouting facts about every fish they saw, Daniel and Lena exchanging amused glances behind her back. "You know a lot about fish," Lena observed. "It's my thing," Emma said seriously. "Dad, did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts?" "I didn't know that." "It's true. 2 pump blood to the gills, 1 pumps it to the rest of the body. Isn't that cool?" "Super cool." They got ice cream afterward and sat by the harbor, watching boats drift past. Emma was texting someone, probably one of her friends, and Daniel and Lena sat in comfortable silence. "This is nice," Lena said quietly. "Us. All of us." "Yeah, it is." "Think we can keep it?" "I think we can try." And that was the thing, Daniel realized. You couldn't guarantee anything, couldn't promise that everything would work out perfectly. People were messy and complicated, and you could do everything right and still fail. But you could try. You could show up and be present and keep choosing to be there even when it was hard. That had to count for something. That evening, after they dropped Emma back at Sarah's, Daniel and Lena walked along the waterfront, the same spot they'd come to months ago, after the hostage situation, when everything had felt impossible. But now it felt different, lighter somehow. "You know what I realized?" Lena said, stopping to look out at the water. "I'm not scared anymore. Of failing. Of not being enough. I'm okay. With who I am and where I'm going." "That's huge." "I know, and it's because of you, because you made me believe I could be something other than a cop, that I could choose myself. You did that. I just watched." "No, you showed up. That's what mattered. You were there when I needed someone to be there." Daniel thought about that, about what it meant to show up, not to fix everything or save everyone, but just to be present, to witness someone else's struggle and not run from it. "I think that's all any of us can do," he said. "Just show up. For the people we love, for ourselves. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "Is that what we're doing? Showing up?" "Yeah, I think it is." Lena leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, and they stood there watching the sun set over Boston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. It wasn't perfect. Daniel still had bad days where he doubted everything. Lena still had nightmares sometimes, still carried guilt about the people she couldn't save. Emma still had moments where she pulled away, where old wounds resurfaced. Life was messy and complicated, and healing wasn't linear. But they were trying, all of them, choosing every day to show up, to be present, to build something better than what they'd had before. And maybe that was the whole point. Not perfection, not some guarantee of happiness, just the willingness to keep trying, to keep showing up, to choose connection over isolation, vulnerability over numbness, hope over despair. One day at a time, one choice at a time, together. 6 months later, on a cold December night, Daniel sat in a different diner with Lena. Not Murphy's. A new place they'd found in Cambridge, closer to campus. They were both exhausted, Daniel from grading papers, Lena from her internship at a crisis center. But they were there, together. "You know what today is?" Lena asked, looking up from her coffee. "December 20th? It's been a year, since that night at Murphy's, since we met." Daniel thought about that, about the lonely, broken person he'd been a year ago, about Lena, hollowed out from a brutal shift, carrying weight that wasn't hers to carry, about how they'd found each other in that moment of mutual wreckage. "A lot has changed," he said. "Everything has changed. Better?" "So much better." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for being someone who stayed. Thank you for being worth staying for." They sat there in the warmth of the diner while outside the first snow of the season started to fall. Just 2 people who'd found each other when they needed it most. 2 people who'd learned that being present was more important than being perfect. That showing up, even when it was hard, was everything. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them felt alone.